I freak up room, no see, bite it, never bite. Fast water dribbling in the girls down in the guys. Fin non see, blank, you right, fine. OMG, Mac 4, Robin C, Gallon Neck Night. Hot stove talk, Robin C, bringing the high. EC's alive, plus toss under those in my city life. Right? Queens got the dreams united. On the rag, Trump out, bring me stack. Night and under that chocolate flag. Smack that home out the park. Fuck a deafening in black. Side game time, Robin CP time to ignite. Under NYC skies, we fight the good fight. Remains cheer in the orange, we unite. Mets forever. I'm fit to be in sight. Mets riding high. Energy like a live wire. Queen City chance. Passion never tires. Grand slam dreams and paces focus fast. Holding it steady, cause we know we gonna last. We the kings of the field, time to ignite. Under NYC skies, we fight the good fight. Remain cheer in the orange, we unite. Mets forever, I'm fit through your sight. All hearts ignite like NYC stars. Robin CP, guiding even through scars. Queens got the glow, city anthem flows.
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to episode 16 of Mets Hot Stove Live right here on the channels and on X. Hopefully everybody is enjoying their Monday as we are only 2 weeks away from the new year, and we do have a lot to talk about with our New York Mets. Chris, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. It's been a little bit quiet. We've been hearing some steady reports, which has been good. But you know what? I'm excited to talk Mets baseball. Appreciate you all being here with us. Smash those thumbs up buttons for us. We are here talking about the latest and the greatest in Mets land. And we're bound to get some moves at some point, Rob. I mean, this team is not done. I think that's the consensus. And the question is when, not if, with this team right now. So let's get into it.
Well, let's hope we can spark that fire and get that hot stove burning hot for our New York Mets. And we're going to start with the obvious of what's been going on, what the rumors have been going on with the Luis Castillo. I guess this is now the saga with Luis Castillo now when it comes to the possible trade for Luis Castillo. We know there's a couple of teams involved. We know the Mets are involved. They did call up the Mariners sometime last week in regards to what the Mariners are looking for. And I keep on going back to this over and over again. I try to do trade scenarios. I do have a trade proposal that I put together that I'm going to be doing a video tomorrow in regards to Luis Castillo. So I'm trying to figure out what are the Mariners looking for, because the issue is that they're trying to shed payroll. Teams know that are trying to trade for Luis Castillo. I truly believe the Mets will take on every penny of the Luis Castillo contract, which is 3 years, a little over $72 million, plus the fourth year, which is the vested option for $25 million. So it's roughly around 96, just under $100 million in total contract if that fourth year gets vested. I don't know how many teams would be willing to do all that, except the Mets. And I do wonder, what are they looking for? Are they looking for a top 10 prospect and taking on all that money? Because I'm not sure if I do that. I give 2 lower level prospects plus taking on that contract. What are your thoughts when it comes to the possibility of the Mets landing Castillo? And what do you think the overall offer looks like to land Castillo if you're the Mets?
Yeah, you know what? I still think it's going to take a top 10 prospect, unfortunately, right? We saw what the New York Mets, I guess not offer was, but the negotiations were with the White Sox for a controllable arm that wasn't under contract, right? With the former team in the White Sox and Garrett Crochet. We know what he ended up going for to Boston, right? And you know what? There's been so much smoke around Jeff McNeil's name and talking about how the Mariners want a second baseman this, they want a second baseman that. Again, there's another second baseman, and I understand that this is going to turn a lot of Mets fans off of this talk. But the thing here is that if we continue to talk about the Mets in the light that they need a top line starter alongside Kodai Senga, no matter what, they are going to have to give to get. And yes, the Mets understand that they are able to take on this payroll. But at the end of the day, I will also wonder to make a counterpoint to that statement, Rob. Do the Mariners realize that just under $25 million for Luis Castillo, that's also a steal for today's standards and as far as the market goes, right? He's owed $24.15 million over the course of the next 3 seasons. And then the 4th year, which is that vesting option year, you don't even know if you're going to get him with that, if he hits the incentives and all that. But for me, the Mariners could use that and say, hey, listen, you don't even need to go out and sign a Corbin Burnes, right, on this market. You don't need to go ahead and give up, you know, I guess the prospects for a rental in Cease or Valdez. You have your ace for a pretty cheap AAV deal over the next 3 seasons. You don't have to worry about any extensions, right? He's in the prime of his career, and we're asking a competent return in the prospect haul back from you because this is an advantageous contract. If it was $30+ million, we're talking about a different story here for Luis Castillo. We're talking about 24.15. And you see a market where Max Fried got over $27 million a year for 8 years. We'll see what Corbin Burnes makes AAV wise. Sean Manaea is going to be upwards of $25+ million given what Fried got. This is an expensive market. And there's one name that makes the most perfect sense for the Seattle Mariners in terms of giving them offensive production, as well as filling that basically second base need for them. And that's Luis Angel Acuna. So I would probably estimate that that's the Seattle Mariners' initial asking price is Luis Angel Acuna. And then you'll have some, B-level prospects to round out that deal. Instead, yes, you can always send an MLB-ready player to them as well if you wanted to, but this is a very complex sort of package when you're working with multiple different aspects and characteristics, given that you are getting an ace, a controllable ace for 3 years, and he's not a rental.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting about that, right? We know how good the Seattle Mariners GM is when it comes to getting what they want for even certain players under control or not. They've done a good job with that. But you also got Stearns, who is very smart. So it's like, trying to pick each other's brains here. Who's going to bite first when it comes to a possible deal? What about a guy like Jeremy Rodriguez, right? He's in the top 10 in the Met system. He's the middle infielder, right? I would say he's probably at least 2 years away. I'm not sure if they're looking for a major league ready second baseman because I still think they're going after a first baseman. I still think they're going after a Christian Walker, a Pete Alonso, because they can't do anything offensively free agent wise if they don't shed that money. So I think it goes both ways, right? They clearly know that Luis Castillo as an ace of a staff is going to be a lot cheaper than the Burnes, the Frieds, probably Buehler and Manaea might get more money and average annual value than what Luis Castillo is getting, which is just over $21 million. I do wonder how long can Seattle wait, right? Because it's basically who's going to blink first at this point when it comes to Seattle or another team. And I think Seattle is going to have to blink first because they can't have, the Alonsos of the world, the Christian Walkers, the Santanders of the world, coming off the board, and they're going to get left with nothing offensively. And that is their big concern. So I do wonder if we're going to see this develop quick, I would say over the next week or so, because they have to make a move. They got to know that they can shed a certain amount of payroll, because I still believe they can trade with whoever they want. Who is going to still take on that money when teams are still looking for other, you hear about the Giants, you hear about Toronto, right? Those teams, even Boston for that matter. Technically, not so much Boston. I don't think that they're that far with Seattle, but let's say the Giants and the Blue Jays, right? I don't know if the Giants are willing to take on all that money when they still want another pitcher. They still need more bats, right? They're still trying to get more stars there. I do wonder if they're going to take on all that money plus trade what the Mariners are willing to trade. The same thing with the Mets. I think the Mets will easily take on all that money. And I look, Jeremy Rodriguez is a top 10 prospect. Right, I don't think that's too bad, and I would add another top 15 prospect, or like 10 through 15 prospect, no problem, and then also take on all that money. So I do wonder. It's a back and forth game here. It's a who's going to blink first type of process here, and again, the Mets don't leak nothing, so I think that's why the most frustrating part as a Mets fan right now is that we hear nothing. Right, we heard Alex Bregman, we have Pete Alonso, we heard a little bit about Burnes over the last 24 hours. But we don't hear enough. And I think that's frustrating to a lot of people because I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to wake up or we're going to be doing our thing, going to work, school, wherever the hell we're doing on one of these days, and we're going to see the Mets make a trade, and it's going to come out of nowhere, because that's just what happens with the Mets when it comes to a trade.
And it's gonna suck for me because I'm on vacation starting tomorrow, so I'm gonna have to put out a short, or I'm gonna have to just be in my Hawaiian shirt and put out a video. I don't know what you might see on this channel over the next 5 days while I'm on vacation. So I want to let you all know that as well. If I'm a little bit quieter than I have been in recent weeks, right, it's because I am out enjoying my time. Even us Mets content creators need to take some days off from this team, right? But you know what? If something goes down, I'll put something out on my channel. You probably won't see a gorgeous backdrop and background like we usually put out here for the hot stoves, but you will see my face at the very minimum. So, I think Boston would make still, again, perfect sense. We've heard initial reports of them being, in talks with Seattle even after they acquired a Garrett Crochet. So my question to you is, right, we've been, screaming at, the hilltops, talking about the Mets needing an ace. If the situation were to come down to Luis Angel Acuna's name and the Mets needing to absorb all that contract for Luis Castillo, would you do it? Yes or no? Because I'm going to say yes.
Yeah, me too, because what is more of a need? A second baseman or a starting pitcher? A top line starting pitcher at that. Yeah, you have to do it. It's not like Acuna was going to be our starting second baseman. There's a possibility McNeil might be that. Possibility Mauricio, and everybody loves Jet Williams apparently, so I don't think it's that much of an issue. It might hurt a little bit, but what you're looking to obtain here is probably the biggest necessity on this team, and the biggest amount of holes on this team is your rotation. And if you can get a Castillo, it makes it a lot easier to go after a Manaea or a Buehler. You don't have to worry about getting two of those tier B pitchers or even three tier B pitchers. You got your ace. Now you can work around with Kodai Senga. You can actually decide if you want to pay Manaea the extra fourth year, or would you rather go 2 years or even 1 year with Buehler, depending on what he's going to get with a higher AAV. There's a lot of different options there. I think you just have to do it. And I think Stearns is probably trying to lower the price. But again, and what also helps is that you saw Acuna at the big leagues late in the year into the playoffs. And I think that is kind of enticing for a team like Seattle Mariners. You can plug him in at second base tomorrow and you'd be good to go. I know that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. But again, you can't be better if you're not a little uncomfortable in what you have to trade asset-wise. And we have to remember, right? We do add Juan Soto here. Pretty good chance Alonso is going to be coming back. So your lineup is going to be fine. I can assure you the Mets lineup is not going to die if Luis Angel Acuna is not in this lineup. I know that's silly to say, but it's true. It's funny because, Luis Angel Acuna is probably going to be batting 8th or 9th in this lineup. If this lineup is with Acuna, he's probably going to be better 8th or 9th. And I'm sorry, if your 8th hitter is the guy that you're looking for to provide the offense, then the Mets are in more trouble than we think. So I think you do it, you bite the bullet. It is what it is. Get over it. I know the prospect huggers are going to be, probably shedding their tears with a prospect, because at some point you got to do it. And you have to do it for the biggest necessity on this team, and that is the rotation, Chris.
Yeah, 100%. I would do it as well. I only ask that question because I know that there are a lot of Mets fans that we've seen in our live chats, or in the comment section of our videos, saying that the one guy that they would not get rid of above a Jet Williams, above a Drew Gilbert, above a Ronnie Mauricio is Luis Angel Acuna. And you know what? It's hard to argue with, especially with what we saw in a very short sample size with Lindor's back injury and him stepping up in the later part of the season. But at the end of the day, if you are in the camp of understanding and stating that the Mets need an ace, why are we going out to get Juan Soto if we're not going to bring a top-tier starter into this rotation for 2025 and beyond? You do that trade every day of the week. And listen, I'm not very in tune to what the Seattle Mariners' needs are. I know they don't need starting pitching, right? They have Brian Wu, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, and Castillo. So they are able, and more, right? And more. And so they're able to move Luis Castillo. And this is becoming a situation where At first, I was kind of hesitant to, understand and sort of maybe even admit that the Mariners would be open to trading Castillo, but I think it's increasingly clearer that he is going to be on the trade block. And again, this might progress rather quickly depending on what the Mariners have planned for the rest of the open market offensively. But even in addition to that, let's say the Mariners come back to the Mets and say, okay, listen, we'll take Jeff McNeil and his portion of the contract off your hands. It's less than what Castillo is owed, but we'll give you some salary relief in that aspect for the New York Mets. So they're just not taking on $96+ million for nothing and giving away a prospect in return. But, if they take McNeil as well, they would still probably want Acuna because they can have a fifth outfielder, a utility man, and then Acuna can also play second or third base for them as well. So that would make sense as well if they want MLB ready talent in terms of a true veteran in McNeil. And that's kind of like a salary swap right there. And then they still get that top prospect in Luis Acuna, who is also at this point MLB ready. So that would make complete sense. One thing that I wanted to point out, by the way, guys, I do have a Luis Castillo video coming out later tonight on the channel. So make sure you guys are tuned into that. It's not going to be anything extravagant. I'll tell you a little bit about the statistics. We'll go into the numbers and we'll talk about Luis Acuna potentially being a part of this trade. But one thing that I wanted to note, so you all know this up front, and I also do state this in the video that I'm dropping tonight, a little bit of a spoiler alert, is there is one major thing that I'm concerned about with Luis Castillo, and we see this as a talking point amongst a lot of other pitchers that kind of get a little bit older. The numbers throughout the last 3 seasons as a Mariner have been absolutely fantastic, Rob. We cannot take that away from Luis Castillo. He was an all-star in 2023. We know that. But the velocity, the average velocity on his fastball has been declining just a little bit. It was at 97.1 in 2022. It was 96.5 in 2023, and it was 95.6 or 7 in 2024, if I'm not mistaken, per his Savant page. So I get that we're not really concerned about that. And again, we can make excuses for why we shouldn't go ahead and trade or sign for everybody in this league, right? Even for Juan Soto before the signing actually happened. But that is the one thing that I look at with Castillo that would be maybe a red flag, but it wouldn't be enough of a red flag for me to say, hey, listen, Mets, don't trade for him. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of that.
Sure. I was looking at a couple of his, with his velocity as well. And again, it's not like he had a bad season. I know the strikeouts are a little bit down. His home runs were kind of similar to the last couple of seasons. So that didn't change much, but he's still a very good pitcher. And, a miles an hour is not alarming. If it was like 2 or 3, maybe even 4 miles an hour, that's when I would really worry. But, location is key. And if you can still throw 96, 97 miles an hour, if you throw above the letters with your fastball, even if it's a 2-seamer or a 4-seamer, you're going to get strikeouts. You're going to get outs. And that's something that he does well. And he's a pitcher, right? There's too many guys that throw 100 that are just throwers. Luis Castillo is a pitcher. And because he's in Seattle, not enough people watch him enough. Not enough people watch him on a daily basis. And I don't think you can get a full grasp on what a player is until you see him every single day, right? We knew how good Juan Soto was because we saw him with the Nationals all those years. Who cares if he played in San Diego? Nobody cared. Mets fans knew what he was. Yankee fans act like they never seen him before, and he did this like he never did this in his career, which he always did. That's why Met fans are excited about Juan Soto. Same thing with any other player that is not on, especially not on the East Coast, and you don't see him a lot on the West Coast except for a certain amount of highlights, because highlights you're either going to see the really bad or the best, right? If you watch him on a daily basis, you'll see why he's still a top line starter, and that's what Castillo is. And I understand, people love velocity. People look at the strikeouts per 9, which I truly don't care about. I think if your ERA is within that where you want to see a top line starter, I think you're fine. I truly think you're fine. I think Castillo is one of those guys that you go after. And I want to bring up with Frodo in the comments saying that about the Ken Rosenthal article in regards to DePoto was the Seattle GM and talking about they're not shedding payroll or they're not going to trade Luis Castillo unless they get blown away. The fact of the matter is he knows they need offense. They can't add to their payroll. They have to shed payroll. The obvious choice is Luis Castillo. That's what I can care less what. Of course, a GM is not going to blow up his spot and say, yeah, oh yeah, Luis Castillo is on the trade block. Suitors, come get him. He's not going to say that, right? Just like David Stearns gives open-ended answers, DePoto does the exact same thing in Seattle. He's not going to give you, a clear answer. He's going to work around the bush here. Of course, he's going to say, we want to get blown away with a deal. Of course, he's going to say that, but he can't do that. He knew the problem with his team was offense. He can't add to payroll. So if he sheds that $72+ million for Castillo, he can add most of that, if not all that money, back into payroll with bats in that lineup, which is desperately needed. That's what I was talking about. And that's what, again, I can care less what the GM says about a reporter because they're going to lie to you. That's just a fact. So we'll see if that develops over the next couple of days. We know there's about 4 to 5 teams that are in on Luis Castillo. And this leads to the report, and Ken Rosenthal wrote about this. Is it a possibility that Burnes takes a short, high AAV deal? And that's right up David Stearns, alley right there when it comes to what he would like to do money-wise and years-wise, or specifically years-wise with a pitcher. Do you think Burnes can take a short-term deal with a high AAV, Chris?
He can. I don't know why he would do it, to be honest with you. Like, again, I hear the reports, I understand it. And so I can see that sort of situation playing out. It would shock me a little bit, though, because I'm like, what does this guy have to prove, Rob? What does he have to prove to this league? Unless he and his agent, right, get a hold of this. I don't even know what to call this talking point between, people saying the K rate's going down, he's not striking enough hitters out, and he's not going to be an ace for you over the next couple of seasons. If that's what they're concerned about, and maybe they go ahead and say, oh, yeah, you want to see this? We'll prove it to you one more time, and he works on the strikeouts portion of his game, maybe. But there's no incentive in my mind. And if I'm the agent of Corbin Burnes, right? It's Boris, by the way, right? If I'm not mistaken. It is Boris. Okay. I was just like, hold on, Boris is representing too many clients here. I'm losing track of, who the big names are, right? Outside of Juan Soto and Pete Alonso. So, yes, I would 100%, if I'm Scott Boras, say to hell with the short-term deal. What does Corbin Burnes need to prove to the rest of the league that he hasn't already proven already, especially coming off of a season where he posted a 2.90 ERA, just north of that, and he was absolutely the ace of the Baltimore Orioles organization, and he pitched a hell of a playoff game to which the Baltimore Orioles showed everybody what their weakness was in not being able to score enough runs for their solidified pitching. And so I would 100% think against that. But there's also potentially a problem with the market, right? We know the Giants and the Blue Jays could be in on a guy like Corbin Burnes. And I don't know if those teams are going to go as far as to offer him a mega deal over 7, 8, 9 years. But let's say they don't. And we know the Mets and the Red Sox presumably won't do that either because they are more in the line of thinking. And I heard this report potentially about the Red Sox owner and their front office not wanting to go down the route of giving long-term deals for pitchers, which also makes no sense because they're willing to give Max Fried 7 years. But anyways, I digress. If that's the case, you limit your market in who you are using to outbid one another in terms of the lack of teams actually in on a Corbin Burnes. And we all know he might want to go west. I think that's been reported. I think that he makes that very clear on all of his social media accounts and posting. I think what I saw, maybe it's factual, maybe it's not, him posting about, the Golden Gate Bridge and whatever, and it feels like home, which is great. I mean, the Giants are right there. Obviously, that could make a whole world of sense for him. But let's just say that they actually are. Him and his camp actually are thinking about a short-term deal. You're 100% right. This is right up David Stearns' alley. And I've been very adamant in all of our hot stove lives over the past couple of weeks that everybody was like, oh, the Mets aren't going to be in on Corbin Burnes. We've heard nothing about Corbin Burnes going to the New York Mets or the Mets even being remotely interested. Well, guess what? That's how they play this game. they do not let you know that they are in on this guy until the very last possible second. So I can still see a world where, let's say, Boris makes it known Cohen and Boris have this working relationship, and that is going to be to the Mets' advantage for many years to come.
Yeah.
That's what people don't understand, especially after this Juan Soto deal. We were kind of questioning after the Correa deal fell through what that dynamic was going to look like. And clearly it wasn't hurt enough to the point where, he wasn't going to give Juan Soto the best opportunity in a Mets uniform, Scott Boras, that is. But yeah, man, if Boris and Burnes both agree that it could be a 2 or 3 year deal and opt out after the first year, he's still in the prime of his career. He proves to everybody that he can strike hitters out at the same rate as 2-3 years ago. Do it 100% today, tomorrow, 7 days of the week. Sign me up 100%. I'm not convinced, Rob. I will say this. I'll end this little rant by saying I'm not convinced that Burnes does this, even given the latest reports. It's still nonsensical to me on why he would risk that, right? There's a lot of risk, not much reward, because teams are already willing to go $30 to $35 million AAV for this guy, right?
It's the years.
So what is he really going to gain AAV wise? Not much.
True,
it's really about the years here, obviously.
Yeah, and I do wonder who's going to give him those years, though, right? Everybody's like, oh, some people in the comments are saying, oh, the Mets seem like they're not going to spend any more money. Well, I mean, who's been coming off the board? Who's been spending that money, right? I mean, it's not like, there's a couple of teams out there, like competitive teams, that have been spending a ton of money and bringing in player after player after player. Hasn't really happened. Look, the Juan Soto signing shook up the market, right? You don't know what other players are worth at this point, position player wise. And then the Max Fried contract, nobody thought he was going to get that many years. And that kind of messed up the pitching market when it comes to, how other pitchers on the market are negotiating. The same thing with position players with the Juan Soto signing. So just think, both New York teams that, gave a 15-year deal to Juan Soto and a 8-year deal to Max Fried messed up the markets. That's just a fact. Right? You get the player you want regardless of how you do it, but that's a fact. So I don't know. The only team that I could see given I don't even know, because wouldn't you think the Giants, who are desperate for stars, just go out there and blow everybody out of the water for Corbin Burnes? But they haven't done it yet. And that's why I keep saying there's a lot of talk about not giving pitchers more than a 5-year deal. And I do wonder, and I know Boston and the Yankees were kind of trying to go 7 years with Max Fried, and the 8th year got Max Fried. But even there was too many people that weren't excited about that deal at all. And I do wonder, a team like the Giants, who is clearly looking to add stars, are not going that far. I mean, why would they have to outbid themselves when nobody else is going to go that far? And I think that's the reason why the Burnes market is so slow, because I think the market for Burnes isn't as big as we actually think. Everybody knows about Toronto. Toronto's willing to give anybody 100 years and a ton of money, but nobody wants to go there. So are we serious about Toronto? No. So who's the Mets competition here? It's the Giants. And, maybe he'll have the upper hand if it's a similar offer. He might want to go back home to Northern California. Sure. But if there's no competition for Burnes, why would the Giants give him 8 years when you don't have to? And I think that's the holdup with this Burnes situation, and why I think the Mets still haven't made a deal yet for a Minaya or a Buehler, or even trade for Castillo yet, because I think they're actually paying attention to the Burnes market, because it's a smart move. If you think that this was going to be an 8-year deal worth $250+ million, and now you seem like the market's coming back, why would you make a move when you can eye this Burnes market, and you might get him on a 4-year, 5-year deal for massive AAV?
Well, do you think you'd get him for 4 or 5 years, or do you think he would just take the 1 year prove it deal again? Because I think that 4 or 5 years, he handcuffs himself to another contract.
Well, you can have opt-out, right? You can have a 4-year deal and have an opt-out after the first year, and
you could.
You don't have.
Yeah, you could 100%.
No, it protects him, right? Because if he doesn't have a good first year or a great first year, he can opt back in for that $35, $36 million, a year contract.
Yeah, maybe like something stupid like a 5-year deal and then opt out after the first and second year to
Sure,
protect him in the prime of his career. And
sure,
someone saying that it would take realistically probably closer to $40 million for Corbin Burnes for that to
sure.
happen. You know what? Do it. I don't care.
Yeah,
Do it.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
believe in him that much.
I agree. And that's the thing too, because like it's a weird offseason because right, everybody thought, oh, when Soto signs, the dominoes are gonna fall, right? Then when Max Fried signed, one of the top pitchers on the market, everybody thought everything was gonna just fall into place, and nothing did. So there's a reason for that because the market isn't as pronounced as we all thought it was for a player like Burnes, a player like Anthony Santander. After the big boys come off the board, we're like, what the hell is going on? And I think that's exactly what it is. I think the Giants would love Corbin Burnes tomorrow. But again, if no other team is bidding more than 7 years or even 6 years for Corbin Burnes, why would the Giants come in with a 7-year deal? It just doesn't make sense. And the same thing that goes for Anthony Santander, right?
Yeah.
You know, what is his market? What is his dollar amount? What is his years? It's hard to compare it to Juan Soto because, well, he's not Juan Soto and he's not 26 years old. So it's hard to judge, right? You hear a lot of people talking about 5 years, $100 million, around $25 million. Yeah, shoot, if that's the case, Mets get him too. Why not? Right? I mean, it's so many different ways to look at it, but I think the market is coming back. You saw this a couple of years ago where a lot of teams were hesitant to basically give anybody long-term deals, and the market eventually came back. Why Blake Snell got a 1-year deal? Why did a lot of these guys took prove-it deals or 2 years with an option? I wonder if these teams are looking at that again and saying we can control the market here, and the big deals are not actually going to happen, and they're going to get these players on at least no more than a 5-year deal. And I wonder if that's going to be the case with the rest of the guys
Well,
on the market.
then the Yankees must have been very desperate to give Fried 8 because,
Sure.
I I mean, and maybe he lucked out. Oh, also, we haven't seen anything about Max Fried. There's no official signing. I don't know what's going on with that. Has anyone heard
Yeah, I
anything
know.
about
There
that?
was a report that, I mean, it's been a week already,
It's been a long time.
right? Because he signed, right, I think the last day of the winter meetings, right? So it's like it's almost a week already. And you
Yeah.
wonder what the hell's going on. And, I would think they would want to get it done before, the holidays, the Christmas starts. So I do
Yeah,
wonder if there's an issue with the medicals and,
maybe.
Korea,
So
it is.
I was just kind of looking at that because I was just like, I haven't heard or seen anything related to Max Fried after that deal actually went through. So I don't know. We'll see about that. Also, this is a perfect segue, but in terms of the Burnes market and the Toronto Blue Jays, they're also having problems in terms of one of the reports that I also saw that I can't verify if it was factual or not, but there was some murmurings about, them giving Guerrero Jr. an offer for an extension and him turning it down. And that's something that's going to be a very big priority for the Blue Jays as well. So that also could be, as much as the Blue Jays want to spend, that could also be hindering them in terms of going all out for Corbin Burnes and allocating $250-300 million for Corbin Burnes with a extension for Vladimir Guerrero looming, or in the worst case scenario for them, if they decide to hold on to him, which I think they're going to do, I would have no reason to believe that they're going to trade him this offseason if they have to outbid another team for him next offseason. And that's kind of a perfect segue to talk about first base, because I know there's a lot of Mets fans, I'm not one of them, that's holding out the hope that the Mets could trade for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. this offseason. Again, I promised you all, and Rob and I are still working on the giveaway Soto shirt/jersey as well. So don't think we forgot about that. We are still going to go ahead and be giving that away here very soon, now that we have him introduced as a Met and we know the jersey number, etc. But yeah, the first baseman market. I mean, Pete Alonso, there's been a lot of different reports. There's some reports saying that, the fit makes absolutely sense for what the Mets need and the lineup needs. And then there's other people, in particular Steve Gelbs, who's going on wherever he's going on in podcast or whoever he's talking with, saying he would lean on, his gut feeling being the Mets are not going to have Pete Alonso here for the 2025 season and beyond. So I don't know where this is coming from both sides, but this is a very interesting topic in talking about his market versus the sweepstakes of Bregman, because I think we can almost loop this in as Alonso and Bregman in this talking point, because I don't know about you, and I also understand that the Mets fans we're getting a little bit greedy, right? We haven't heard anything since Juan Soto. We're getting a little bit greedy and possibly thinking that there could be both Bregman and Alonso in this lineup. There's no doubt. I would be so very certain. I'm like 99.1% certain you get one or the other, Mets fans. It's Alonso or Bregman, which is why we've been having these debates about these two guys. You've seen a lot of podcast episodes elsewhere talking about these two guys. I have my feelings known about this situation anyways, but it could beg the question, because if the Mets were to land Bregman and they lose out on Alonso, you could either move Vientos to first base or get a stopgap. There's two different routes you can take with that.
Right. Yeah, and I did it on my show yesterday, Bregman or Alonso, because I doubt it's going to be both. It doesn't make sense. Like, if the Mets rotation was finalized and pretty set up, maybe I can see more of a possibility, but it's either one or the other. And I know the Met fans are going to lean towards Pete Alonso, and, I get it. I really do get it. There was somebody, I forgot who it was on X, put up career stats side by side, and Alonso won a lot of the categories, which is funny to look at, because and then you look all the categories that Pete Alonso has better than in the offensive category, yet Bregman's WAR is 6 points higher than Pete Alonso. And yeah, defense does have something to do with that, but there's other aspects of those numbers for Bregman. If you look at it throughout his career, right, even though he doesn't have as many home runs, as many hits, as many home runs, as many RBIs, all those times when he did get those runs in and, get those big RBIs, they happen more often and with less at-bats. So, and when it does happen, he does it more often than Pete Alonso. And I talked about padded stats, right? I've talked about this for years. Chris, you did a great video during the season, the end of the season, in regards to Pete Alonso, and that his stats are somewhat inflated. And that's not saying he's a bad player or anything like that, right? But this year opened a lot of people's eyes with Pete Alonso, and a lot of Met fans' eyes, where nobody really cared about his career problems with runners in scoring position, and when those RBIs actually mattered, or those home runs actually really mattered in a game. And yet this year, all of a sudden, because it was his free agent year, nationally started to pick it up. The national audience started to pick it up, and then Met fans started to notice it more and more, even the people that loved him. And he was on the verge of making out in the postseason, in the wild card, to basically almost every Met fan probably did not want him back if he didn't hit that home run, and the Mets would have lost in a wild card series. That's how close it was from that to actually happen. And this is not saying I don't want Pete Alonso, but we act like we can't win if Pete Alonso's not on this team, and that is not factual. And this is not saying, right, I truly think that it's going to be very similar deals between Bregman and Alonso. I think it's going to be a 5 or 6 year deal, probably between 160 and 180. I don't think Bregman's getting 200. I don't think Pete Alonso's getting 200. I think they both want it. I don't think they're going to get it because the market isn't really developing for them. So you're not actually paying more for one or the other. But what do you look here for? Do you just look at, Pete Alonso has been a career Met, and that's why you want him? Or do you want the world champion, Alex Bregman, who gives you elite defense at third base, which you're going to need in the infield if you're going to go with these tier B pitchers? You're going to need elite defense. And let's continue to talk about Pete Alonso's defense isn't as good. The metrics don't show him as good. He picks balls. That's what he does well. Everything else is kind of, average at best. Yeah. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you, if you had to choose, take your Mets bias out of the way, which I know you can do. We've done it before. If I said the contract is very similar, let's say same years, 6 years, say the money is very close, not much where anybody would say, I would have to go with this guy over that guy. Who would you want right now on December 16th on a Monday? Would you want Bregman or would you want Pete Alonso?
So I think I agree with you, regardless of however many years, both of these guys get, because there is some talks about short-term deals with both of these guys as well. Again, I mean, it would make sense maybe for both of them, but more so for Pete Alonso. But again, if everything's consistent, I think that's what the question was here that was posed to me.
Mhm.
If everything's consistent, they should be making relatively the same AAV, if not maybe a couple $1 million, in the favor of Bregman, given the third base market versus the first baseman market. I think Spotrac has Bregman at $30 million AAV right now, and Pete Alonso at 29. I think Bregman can make 30. I think he can make 30. I mean, Matt Chapman's making over $25 million a year.
Good point.
And then Devers and Machado are both at 31 plus. So if you put Bregman right in the middle there, give him a nice round number, $30 million makes sense. Now, again, and talk about whether he's worthy of that or not. You could take a look at, if Pete Alonso is actually worthy of being the highest paid first baseman, which $29 million would make him. I still got to go Pete Alonso, man. I got to go Pete Alonso. 2024 numbers aside, and even in 2024, Bregman didn't have the best career year, right? In his own right. And honestly, a lot of the metrics in 2024 point toward Pete Alonso having the more productive season. And you can talk about situational stuff as well. I think we talked about this, before. You take a look at 2 outs and runners in scoring position, and you take a look at runners in scoring position in general. Pete Alonso beats Alex Bregman in every single one of those categories. Runners in scoring position, batting average 230 versus 232 in favor of Pete. The OPS in that same situation with runners in scoring position, 694 versus 762 in favor of Pete Alonso. Let's take a look at 2 outs runners in scoring position, 239 batting average for Pete Alonso, 194 batting average for Alex Bregman, and the OPS in that category, 620 OPS for Bregman and a 771 OPS for Pete Alonso, right? And you can keep on going down the board, right? If you guys really want to take a look at these differences, because there are situations in the clutch statistics and with certain situations with runners in scoring position, let's say runners on third base with less than 2 outs, right? That is Pete Alonso is hitting on third, less than 2 out. Pete Alonso is hitting 207 to Alex Bregman's 379. That's a vast difference in favor of Bregman. But then you take a look at runner on third with 2 outs. Pete Alonso is hitting 321 to Alex Bregman's 211. So again, we can just sit here and nitpick, choose a lot of different scenarios between clutch statistics and runners in scoring position. I think everything remaining the same, I'm taking Pete Alonso. I'm sorry. I know that you're going to get the higher strikeout rate by probably 12% more with Pete Alonso. The walk percentage has been going down for Alex Bregman. It's an inverse trend for Alex Bregman over the past 3 seasons. Strikeout percentage for him is going up, not nearly as much as Pete Alonso's, but that's to be expected with such a high home run hitting guy, right? Of his caliber, and Pete Alonso, he's going to swing and miss. It's a given, proven thing with home run hitters. I mean, Teoscar Hernandez. Does anyone care about what Teoscar Hernandez's strikeout percentage is and strikeout rate is? I know a lot of people don't, right? And his is probably even worse than Pete Alonso's. So we can go through and nitpick, because these guys are, at the end of the day, I think it's closer than a lot of people want to even imagine that haven't taken a look at the deep dives of these 2 guys. But for me, when I'm talking about everything remaining consistent offensively, yes, Pete Alonso makes your lineup better. Now, defensively, Alex Bregman clears Pete Alonso by a wide margin. So would you rather prioritize the defense at third base by moving Vientos over and having Bregman as your third baseman? Or would you rather prioritize having more offense, right? A lot more offense, I think, with Alonso over Bregman, in having him be your first baseman, but knowing that he's lacking in his footwork, his range, and everything else, his throwing at first base. This is the age-old debate, and we're probably going to continue to have this debate until one of these guys signs with the Mets or any other team. So to answer your question, I know I just went over a lot of numbers there and a lot of different scenarios. I'm taking Pete Alonso.
Yeah, and look, I agree with you. And look, here's the problem. We're comparing 2 guys who are completely different players, right? Bregman is not a home run hitter, right? He's not a big power guy, right? He's an RBI guy that puts the bat on the ball and, does what he needs to do to get those runners in, and he does that. Pete Alonso is a power guy. He gets the majority of his runs from power, And his average has been going down. The same thing with Bregman, but we're looking at two different comparisons here, right? We're looking at Bregman the player and Pete Alonso the player. I can almost guarantee you, if Pete Alonso was never a Met, there'll be more people looking for Bregman over Pete Alonso, and that's a fact because Met fans have seen Pete Alonso over the duration of his career so far. That is exactly why Met fans want Pete Alonso over Alex Bregman. We're comparing two guys that you shouldn't be comparing when it comes to, oh, well, he has more home runs. Well, duh. Pete Alonso's a power hitter. Bregman's not. And somebody also put some on Twitter, I think it was yesterday, that Bregman would have actually hit more home runs at Citi Field than he did in Minute Maid Park. And I was like, I wouldn't have thought that. Why is that? Because there's a couple of times, you know that gap in that between the Crawford boxes and left center field, right? That digs out a lot. And he had a lot of balls caught in that area where they would have been out at Citi Field, at least 4 to 5 more home runs more. Now, I'm not saying that's the guarantee. Oh, we got to sign him because of that. No. But, for all the analytical geeks, when you always talk about, well, I want this player because of WAR or something like that, there's got to be a reason why all the stats lean towards Pete Alonso offensively. But 6 points higher WAR. Why is that? Is that only because of his glove? Or
I think it is, Rob. I think the large majority is his glove.
But that's a lot, though. So he saves more. He provides more of an outcome based on his defense than Pete Alonso's offense. That's basically what you're saying. That much of a difference? That's huge. So he basically saves more runs than Pete Alonso's gets more runs like that, and it helped win ball games based on that. That's crazy.
I have no other explanation, honestly.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why it was confusing me a little bit. Like everything was highlighted. Pete Alonso, except for on base and strikeouts and average. And then the WAR. I didn't even bother looking at the WAR because I hate that stat. I think it's silly, but this is what teams look at. This is what a lot of fans look at. I mean, we had arguments before when it comes to WAR being a way to look at it. It's crazy. But is the glove that much of a difference where it helps you win more than Pete Alonso's offense? That's nuts. And I don't agree with it. Right? Alonso probably is the better offensive player for sure. I believe that.
Oh, 100%. It's not a question.
But we're talking about David Stearns here. What does he like, right? He talks about defense being a big priority, but he also talks about home runs being the easiest way to get runs. So, it's kind of like, could we take Bregman's defense and Alonso's offense and put it together? That would be great, right? That would be a perfect player for us, but it's not possible. So, and I think that's why there's more conversation about Alex Bregman because of the fact you can push Vientos over to hit 35 home runs and then put Bregman, who is a vacuum at third base, who can provide 25 home runs, no problem. And you kind of basically do the same thing where you got a shutdown defensive guy at third base, and you're still getting a tremendous amount of power at first with Vientos. And now Vientos as your first baseman is a 300 hitter, right? He can bat 290, 300, 35 home runs. He can provide that 90 RBIs, maybe even 100 RBIs if that's the case. And you can get a shutdown defensive player plus a guy that can still hit you 25 home runs. I do wonder if they're looking at it like that. I'm not saying I will, right? I still think Pete Alonso is the better player just by a minimal margin. And I probably would lean Pete Alonso just because. But I think there's too many Met fans lowering the expectation of Alex Bregman because they probably haven't seen him enough. The whole thing where you don't see him a lot unless there's highlights, good or bad. I think if you watch him every day, you'll see how important he actually is to a team.
So if we're prioritizing run production, I mean, and I've seen this a little bit in the chat here, if you're talking about historically, Bregman's had 2 of 9 seasons where he's posted 100 plus RBIs, and Pete Alonso's done that 3 times of his first 6 seasons, right? So that's that. And also, I just gave the stats talking about runners in scoring position in 2024. not even any other year in 2024. If you think that Pete Alonso was bad bringing runners home or hitting at a high clip with runners in scoring position, Bregman by the numbers was objectively as bad, if not even worse. So what would you have expected if Bregman and Alonso swapped places in 2024? Bregman statistically would have failed at the same rate. So that shouldn't even be really a discussion.
Well, Chris, let me give the argument that everybody's given, right? Pete Alonso didn't have no protection. Well, did Alex Bregman have protection?
No, he did not. No,
okay,
he did
so
not.
there you go. There you go. So you can't use that argument for Alonso and not use it for Bregman, right? I don't use that argument, right? I think, see, this is where I came back yesterday, and I never said this, but now I'm saying it. Pete Alonso was supposed to be the protection for somebody else in this lineup. It wasn't supposed to be the other way around. You can't tell me Pete Alonso's a great offensive player or a great power guy and a great offensive player, and then you come back with the hypocritical answer or a hypocritical quote and say, oh, Pete Alonso needs protection. This wasn't supposed to be the case. Met fans told me Pete Alonso was the best player on their team. Then he should be protecting that another player to make that player better. It shouldn't be the other way around. So if you think Pete Alonso needs protection in this lineup, then he was never as good as you portrayed him. That's what I told Met fans yesterday. And it might have hurt some feelings, but that's a fact. So don't give me Alonso needs protection and then you're going to kill Bregman. And yeah, the offensive stats show it. But where was his protection, right? He wasn't batting in front of Alvarez.
Well, what was the lineup configuration for Houston? Let's take a look at it.
Somebody brought it up on Twitter, but I kind of looked at it quickly.
I'm going to take a look at this. Let's just go into their wild card. The Tigers versus Astros series wild card. Where's the lineups? Because I watched that series, but I didn't watch it like, you know what I mean? I didn't watch it to a T. Okay, Altuve, Tucker, Alvarez, and Bregman. So Bregman was the protection for Alvarez and Tucker because those two guys were hitting before Bregman. This is what the game one wild card series this past season. This is the Astros lineup was Altuve, Tucker, Alvarez, Bregman. That was their top four.
Yeah, so that's interesting though. So he was protecting Alvarez for that matter. So you can say that people were throwing more strikes to Alvarez, why Alvarez had a really damn good season, and Bregman was getting tougher pitches because there was nobody behind him. So there's the same argument to be had. And that's the frustrating part. Look, I'm still leaning towards Pete Alonso because I think it just fits better. And it's easier just to plug Pete Alonso right back at first base than moving Vientos to first and putting Bregman at third. But we're acting like Bregman's a garbage. Well, some Met fans, or most of them probably, are acting like Bregman's garbage. And that's not the case, right? What happens if you want to, you said it, Chris. What if Soto is behind Bregman? Bregman probably have a better season, no?
I think Soto should be behind whoever the Mets sign next. I think Soto should be behind them regardless.
Well, see, that's the thing, right? You can have that argument for both players, right? And again, Bregman, you would think Alvarez would be protecting Bregman, but that's not the case. You see, there's a reason why people around the league, or at least the Astros, think that Bregman should be batting behind Alvarez, right? You would think it would be the other way around, just on based on common sense, but clearly they think Bregman should be behind those guys. Why is that? Because I think there's still players that fear a guy like Bregman. I don't look, because it's not just about power. I think we fall in love with that way too much. And I know the Mets' power was a lot better this year than it was in years past. But again, you add Soto's 30-plus home runs to this lineup, right? You can get Bregman and get 25. And again, you could say, oh, you get Pete Alonso with 40 home runs and you add that 30-plus with Soto, and it's great. But just adding Soto makes your lineup already better, right? I think the Mets can easily score between 5 and 6 runs per ball game, even with the lineup currently constructed right now. And if you add Bregman and say a stopgap first baseman, let's say a Paul Goldschmidt or trade for Yandy Diaz, or, I don't think they're going to go away after Christian Walker, but, say if they go onto that side over there, you're still getting about 15 to 20 home runs from one of those guys, maybe even more. So you're not losing that much offense when you also add other players that can still give you a combination of 45 to 50 to 55 home runs combined.
And I don't think Alex Bregman is garbage at all. I know that other
Right.
Mets fans. I don't know what other Mets fans have been saying. To be honest with you, I haven't really been keeping up with that. To be honest with you, Bregman to me is not trash. He's not garbage. I
No,
think Pete Alonso gives you the better opportunity to be more successful in your lineup and your offensive output and production. That's just my humble opinion. So before we transition really quickly into the reliever market, because I got to get out of here
yep.
soon. This is essentially what I would do for offense, right? I'd re-sign Pete, I'd trade Starling Marte, and I'd sign Jock Peterson as my DH, and I'd roll with that lineup right there. That's what I would do, in my humble opinion.
Book it.
That's
All
what
right.
I would
So
do.
the slow developing reliever market. I knew this was going to be a slow market. I've said it for a while. Everybody's worrying about their position players. Everybody wants the offense off the board before they even talk about the bullpen. So the bullpen is what it is. I am not worried about the bullpen market when it comes to David Stearns at all. I already talked about how many guys the guys we have in the bullpen already. So you don't need to add that much more. You just need a little bit more quality guys, maybe even one or even two guys, and you're going to be fine. Again, Garrett, Nunez, Buto, Diaz. That is a solid four in the back end of your bullpen. You need two more guys. There's about 47, I think I counted correctly, relievers available. All right. You're going to get the guys that you need to get. And if that's another lefty, is that another righty? It depends, right? Tanner's got guys. For some people, are still saying this in the chat and in comments over the last couple of days. That's not happening. You're not paying $80 million to a guy who's going to be an eighth inning guy when you have a $20 million guy as your closer. It just nobody does that. All right, nobody does that. So, Chris, bullpen market, you've talked about it many times, but do you think the Mets are going to go that low budget where it's like a 1-2 year deal, not a lot of money, even though they kind of, spent, I think Clay Holmes, they kind of paid as a starter, so to speak, but that's kind of reliever money if you really think about it. 3 years, $38 million. And I think that's where they're probably going to lean at the end of the day when spring training is over. But the slow developing bullpen market, why do you think that is? And do you think the Mets are probably just going to get one lefty that might not be great and a righty that might be okay?
Yeah, I think the bullpen for the Mets, and there could be differences in opinions on this, and I know that a lot of people weren't pleased with the bullpen last year. I think it was serviceable. I think it has an opportunity to grow and get better, but I think that the core that you have right now moving forward into 2020 five is in a lot better shape, right? Than perhaps the bullpen was going into 2024, especially with the health of Edwin Diaz, seeing a full sample size of him and knowing that you have basically got him back on track. And, he is probably a lot more comfortable going into the season than he was last season with the whole injury landscape. You've got Clay Holmes that you can rely on to be that sort of back end guy if you need him to be, right? Depending on what happens with the Mets and their rotation and how they fill out the back end. And you've got Jose Buto, who will probably be starting as an everyday reliever for you, perhaps even a long man, where you had to kind of throw him into that role mid-season last season after he started a handful of games for you. So I think that consistency-wise, there's a lot of more things to look forward to in 2025 in terms of the bullpen. I think it has an opportunity to become better. I think that we're going to see a signing or two. There's going to need to be a lefty, 100%. The more that I look at Brooks Raley, although I would definitely bring him back for a
Mhm.
very cheap deal, you probably still wouldn't have him until maybe mid-season, perhaps
Yeah.
maybe like May, June earliest in that time frame. So can the Mets, stay afloat and find another lefty before Brooks Raley comes back? Maybe, but that's kind of wishful thinking. So I do think that a lefty outside of Tanner Scott is going to be necessary. Obviously, the Mets lost Nate Lavender to the Rule 5 draft.
Mhm.
That's unfortunate because that was an internal candidate that I definitely could have saw. One name that I really like is still Tommy Canley, and I think that he would be a perfect fit, especially with that changeup usage. Again, I was talking about Devin Williams and maybe the Mets exploring a trade for Devin Williams before he went to the Yankees, right? And that was a high usage changeup pitcher. And so Tommy Canley kind of fits that mold. He's not as good as Devin Williams is at all. I'm not trying to sell you on that. But in terms of having that sort of changeup specialist, I like Tommy Canley a lot. So again, I think it's very clear and obvious why the Mets, the reliever market is sort of holding up and still having to it's still taking shape, like you said, right? And because the strategy for a lot of teams in this league is just throwing something at the wall and seeing what sticks with the bullpen,
Yep.
so to speak, right? That's the philosophy, and that's what David Stearns has also done throughout his career. It works, and it can work at a very high level. So I'm not worried about the bullpen at all. I think that there's going to be additions, but it won't be anything that knocks your socks off like a Tanner Scott. So that's what I'll leave you all with. Again, I do have to drop here. Rob's going to close it out. I apologize. I'm trying to get everything in order, so I'm sorry I have to dip out of here. Rob, you take it away for me. And Mets fans, again, I know that we're still craving some moves here, but it's going to be okay. They're going to give us something to talk about, and it's probably when we least expect it. Hopefully it's after I come back from vacation, but I'm highly anticipating a move in the next couple of days, to which I'll just have to make things work. New video on the channel tonight. I appreciate it. Please smash those thumbs up buttons for us. Again, the shameless plugging. I appreciate you, Rob, as always, setting this up. Be good, Mets fans in the chat. Appreciate the support as always, and I'll see you all on the flip side.
Safe travels, buddy.
Appreciate it. See you all.
All right, so guys, again, that's his thoughts on the bullpen market. I'm not even going to bring up more about the bullpen market because I don't think it's going to develop into anything until the second tier of top free agents come off the board, like the Alonsos, the Santanders, the Burnes. I think until that happens, the bullpen market is slowly developing. Teams, their less concern, unless you need a closer, which some teams do need, you're not going to hear other bullpen arms go off the board. There's going to be more than enough guys the Mets can go after when their lineup is, or their roster is basically almost filled, right? The bullpen is probably going to develop probably late into December, early January, maybe even mid-January, even closer to, the beginning of February. That's probably when a lot of the guys are going to come off the board. It's going to be later in the year or even into the new year. So I think that's going to be where that bullpen market is going to develop into. So let's see. Mauricio is healthy. They finally did say that he's getting better and that he's finally doing baseball activity, which is a great sign. And hopefully he is ready to go full strength by the time spring training comes with Mauricio. Who said that? Juan. So that's why. That's also a possibility. Like, you can, if they want to keep Mauricio off the field, they can easily put him as the DH. And I think a lot of people would actually like that. You get that bat and you get to protect that leg on the field, that he's not on the field as much playing defensively, which is a good sign. So that is an option as well. I think the DH option is not going to be very much looked at elsewhere. I think the Mets are going to use it as a versatile position. If you want to give Pete Alonso a day off, you DH him. You want to give Vientos a day off, DH him. Everybody, Nimmo, Soto, all these guys that you can think of. Lindor, who obviously, he talked about, he looking like he's going to be healthy back-wise into the season, but you all got to caution that because backs are tricky. You can DH Lindor one day. So I think DH is going to be a fluid situation. I think that's a better way to do it, to be quite honest with you. I think you can keep guys that you want in a lineup, even when you can keep them off their feet for a game defensively. You can still have that bat in the lineup. I think the defense right now, the way the team is set up, there's more guys that can DH on a daily basis to get them off the field for a day, which makes the most sense with this Mets team, right? The reason why we wanted a big bat in the DH spot, because there wasn't enough offense on this team when we all knew it, right? If the Mets are going to get Alonso, which I still believe they are, right? This lineup is so much more deeper, and there's so much more offense with that lineup in regards to adding Juan Soto and then bringing back Pete. And you talk about Vientos and Alvarez, who we all believe would have a better year than he had this year. You're adding more offense. So the DH is more of a situation where you want to give guys rest on the field. You throw them into the DH spot, and I think that's more of a better situation because the last few seasons, the Mets desperately needed a big bat to add the offense to their lineup, and that's why we always talked about a DH being a big bat. The Mets necessarily don't need that right now. And that DH spot can just be open for guys that you need to give days off on the field. And there's a lot of those guys, right? You can give Juan Soto a day off. to get a little bit better defensively in right field. You can give Nimmo a day off, who's been, who had a rough season when it came to injuries last year. You can DH Alonso one day. You can DH Vientos, Lindor. You can have so many options at DH while keeping those main guys in your lineup in the lineup because of that DH. So, with that said, guys, we talked about the Castillo possibility. I still think the trade route is probably the best case scenario or the best way the Mets are going to get their frontline starter. We talked about a short-term deal that Ken Rosenthal brought up in an article, that is there a possibility, because the market doesn't seem as big as once thought with Corbin Burnes in a long-term deal. Even the Giants, who probably is his likely destination, is not probably going to go to that 7-8 year ilk or years for Corbin Burnes as much as they want him. And you would think they have the edge just based on location and where he probably wants to be on the West Coast. There's not a big market for Corbin Burnes. And if you can get him on a 4 or 5 year deal and maybe give a crazy high AAV, that might be a perfect scenario for the New York Mets, where David Stearns might actually close in on Corbin Burnes. And I think that's the reason why you haven't seen Manaea on the Mets yet, or Buehler on the Mets yet. I think, or, Flaherty, or those tier 2, tier B guys. I think he's really looking at the market for Corbin Burnes. And again, the Giants aren't stupid either. Why do you have to give an 8 year deal when you probably don't have to Corbin Burnes, when the competition is really not there for Corbin Burnes? There's probably a better chance that Corbin Burnes gets a 4-5 year deal for high AAV than he does a 7-8 year deal for a lower AAV. I think that's a real possibility here. And I wouldn't be shocked if you hear rumblings that the Mets are now in on Burnes, because a 4 or 5 year deal is much more interesting and a lot more intriguing to the Mets than a 7-8 year deal. And I would not be shocked that the Mets, you start to hear rumblings that the Mets are involved with Burnes because of the situation that's happening with Burnes, that the market isn't robust as it was with Juan Soto, or even a Max Fried for that matter. Even Max Fried had about 2 or 3 suitors. And that's why he got the 8 years, because there was competition for Max Fried. The competition is really not there for Corbin Burnes. And that is the interesting part. I don't think Baltimore is going to be in it on a long-term deal. But again, Boris and Burnes are probably looking at, we can get more of a competition if you look for a 5 year deal, 4 or 5 year deal. More teams will be involved, which might ultimately increase the years and the dollars if more teams are fighting for it. And I think that's where the road's going to go for Burnes here. And I would not be shocked if Burnes and the Mets starting to hear linked towards each other, because of the fact that a 4 or 5 year deal is a lot more intriguing for the Mets when it comes to Corbin Burnes. And we just talked about the Alonso Bregman situation, guys. Again, 99.9% of Mets fans are probably leaning towards Alonso. And I've said, if I had to choose, the numbers and the amount of money and the years are probably going to be very similar for both players. I am still leaning towards Alonso because of the fact, yes, the offense looks like it is better than Alex Bregman. But we're comparing the two guys based on what they do well, which is totally different. Pete Alonso is a 40 home run guy. Bregman was never that. So comparing home runs isn't the way to compare these guys. You can't compare the defense. That is not fair on the Alonso end. Bregman is much more of an elite defensive guy than Pete Alonso, right? So you got to look at the intangibles. Who is going to provide the better overall help to this team, to this Mets team, right? You would think with the addition of Juan Soto, with hopefully a better year from Alvarez, with hopefully a better year from Nimmo, right? You think Vientos is going to be the guy. Lindor is going to be that guy. Do we need that tremendous amount of more offense in this lineup? Or will we need a lockdown defender that can still give you 25 home runs, probably a better average, but doesn't provide the 40-plus home run power that Alonso provides, right? You could look at it many different ways. But it's where what this team needs, because Bregman's bat is not terrible, right? Too many people are acting like Bregman is not offensively good enough, which is wrong. Again, we can't talk about Pete Alonso's protection when Bregman basically got the same lack of protection, right? You can put Bregman or Alonso in front of Soto if, the way Chris said it, if you want to do that and get the protection, and you can get better years from both of them, you would think. But we'll see. And I do apologize. There was one super chat. I do apologize for that, John. I lost track of it. Mets signed first baseman Jerry Young, MLB contract. That's interesting. Again, that's more of a depth piece. I think the problem with the Mets last year was that they never really had a backup first baseman. And not saying that Pete Alonso needed days off, but there was probably sometimes mentally he probably just needed a break, and the Mets really couldn't give it to him because there was nobody else there to back him up. So that might be an interesting option, just to have a backup, just in case, give a little bit of a backup situation. And this guy played in AAA, KBO, and all that as well. So interesting, right? It can be a backup option as well. But the interesting thing is, why are we hearing more rumblings about Bregman to the Mets? And maybe that might put maybe the them rumors, maybe, because again, we don't hear leaks from the Mets. So did the Mets leak that out because they want Pete Alonso to maybe take similar money than what Bregman's going to get, probably less years, a little bit less money? Is that a tactic by the Mets where they want Alonso all along, but they want that number to come down a little bit? I do wonder if that's a tactic by the Mets. But again, when you hear David Stearns, he talks about how home runs are the easiest way to get runs, and he also talks about run prevention as a big thing, just like he talked about last offseason. And you can take both of his comments and choose one of those guys. But again, with the addition of Juan Soto and his 30-plus home runs, and would you assume Vientos 30-plus home runs, Lindor 25 to 30 home runs, Nimmo 25 home runs, Alvarez, you just assume would show more power than he did last year. So let's give him on a minimal 20 home runs. That's already 5 guys right there. And I'm not even talking about Siri, who is a 20 home run guy. Those numbers, that is so much more offense. And you can think, yeah, sure, you add Pete Alonso there, and that's just a lot more home runs. But again, I brought up WAR, which is not my most favorite stat. I'm only bringing it up because people love to bring up those stats when they're trying to make an argument. So I'm using what people use to argue this. Why is it that Alonso leads in a lot of offensive categories compared to Bregman, but Bregman has a 6-point higher WAR than Pete Alonso? So when you look at it, you're like, why is that? Why is that number so drastic? Because that's a huge WAR number. That's a 6-point difference. Why is that? I don't think the glove makes it that much of a difference. So what is it? Now, these are career numbers, right? This is not just based on 24. Both of them had down seasons in 24. So we can't bring up one season in 2024. Both of them had down seasons. But if you look at overall career stats, the WAR is 6 points higher for Bregman when Pete Alonso basically leads in almost every offensive category. Yes, the glove has a lot to do with it. Bregman probably saves more runs defensively than Pete Alonso. So that adds a couple of points to the WAR. But 6 points tells me that even though Pete Alonso hits probably 15 to 20 home runs more than Bregman, and the RBIs are probably a 20 to 25 RBI difference in total, and Pete Alonso wins that category too, I still believe that Bregman comes through more often than not in the RBI situations than Pete Alonso overall. Because again, if you look at the total numbers, I still believe Pete Alonso hits a lot of garbage time home runs when the Mets are leading or trailing by a lot. He hits a lot of garbage time home runs. He gets a lot of RBIs based on his home runs. Doesn't really get RBIs anywhere else. He gets the majority of his RBIs from the home run. And I think those extra points to the WAR lean towards Bregman because of an extra couple of points. Because, yeah, the glove obviously adds a couple of points to the WAR, but a total of 6, the offense has to come in somewhere. So to have a 6-point lead WAR over Alonso is very interesting. And I do wonder, are the Mets looking at Bregman, and the rumblings are the Mets are looking at Bregman because of the fact that overall, Bregman gives you a better chance of helping you win than Pete Alonso, because these numbers, career-wise for Pete Alonso, are not shocking to me. I've said it for years. Pete Alonso is a stat pattern. He's always been that. Besides his first year, a lot of his numbers are inflated because he hits a lot of garbage time home runs, which leads to a lot of garbage time RBIs. And again, this has nothing to do, because if you want to talk about playoff stats, Bregman completely destroys Pete Alonso, even though Pete Alonso has been very good in the postseason, the limited number he has. So I'm not even talking about postseason numbers. But again, a big reason why the Mets had a battle back last year was because Pete Alonso was so bad in RBI situations. And Bregman wasn't that much better. Wasn't good either. But it is interesting why Bregman is considered a better WAR player than Pete Alonso, right? There's a lot that goes into it. Sure, we can look at OPS, but I think OPS is another flawed stat, Dan. And that's why I don't like those numbers, right? I don't like OPS because there's a guy that can hit less home runs, but can have a better OPS than a guy that hits a tremendous amount more home runs, right? I don't like OPS, right? People take OPS and take it to the bank where a guy can hit 220 and have a high OPS. It makes no sense. So the fact of the matter is, you can't go wrong with either player, in my opinion. I think both players could help this lineup in different ways. I think you can get the home runs from Vientos, from Soto, from Alvarez, from Lindor. I think you can get that no problem. So, yeah, CP had to go. He had to catch a flight, so he had to leave. So I'm just explaining what we talked about in a whole, and just trying to put everything together to end the stream. So I don't like these stats. I'll tell you this right now. I look at RBIs, I look at ERA, I look at batting average, I look at runs scored, I looked at stuff like that, right? I care about that stuff. I think when it comes to OPS and WAR and what all these other stats that people start to look at is because when they can't find anything else in those normal stats, they have to go to the outrageous stats and the stats that nobody talked about 5 years ago. Sure, S-Man, I understand that. OPS, yeah, absolutely. I understand that. But again, Juan Soto is a better player than Pete Alonso, right? Right? There's a lot of ways to look at it. If you can take OPS and you can compare it to anybody. A guy can hit 220 and OPS can be higher than a guy that can hit 270 with 40 home runs. The OPS will be lower with that guy than a guy that bats 220. That's why it's a stat where it's still a little flawed, in my opinion. I think WAR is an overrated stat. But the reason why I'm using that argument for Pete Alonso over Bregman, or Bregman over Pete Alonso, is because that's what people throw back at me when they're like, oh, but look at his WAR. Well, I'm bringing it back. Well, S-Man, okay, yeah, absolutely, with walks. Exactly. But that's what I'm saying, though. Right? That's why it's like you look at it and you're like, wow, OPS, look how higher the OPS is compared to a guy. But again, give me a guy that bats 270 over a guy who bats 220. Because that guy is going to put bat to ball more often. He gets on base more often just based on batting average alone. Because, again, you're going to give me a guy who, like, say for Peter, let's say Pete Alonso. Let's say somebody that hits 40 home runs, but that hits 220, but doesn't walk a lot, strikes out a ton, but a guy who bats 275, strikes out less, might walk a little bit more. I'll take that guy more often than not because, again, we're looking at Pete Alonso, and this is the argument that is funny to me. People talk about Pete Alonso like he is considered one of the best players on the team. Yet, every time we have an argument about Pete Alonso, I have Met fans telling me he never had no protection. Wait a second. If Pete Alonso was supposed to be one of the best players on the team, why isn't he the protector for a Brandon Nimmo or a Lindor, which he was for the majority of Lindor and Alonso being together? So we blame Lindor for having down seasons and slow starts. Yet Pete Alonso was basically behind him this whole time. So what your argument is, Pete Alonso doesn't have protection, but Pete Alonso was supposed to be the protector of another player to make them better. Now, all of a sudden, everybody's going, oh, Pete Alonso never had protection in his career. But where is that fan when Pete Alonso hit 52 home runs, batting 260? Nobody talked about protecting there. You know why? Because Pete Alonso was supposed to be protecting somebody else. You can't use that argument and then say, oh, Pete Alonso's a career Met. He's one of the best players on the team. Well, if he is, then why isn't he protecting anybody else? And Juan, no, that's not true. Piazza protected guys like Alfonso. Pete Alonso protected other guys. We all knew Pete Alonso was the best, scariest bat in that lineup, even though I would argue that Alfonso was probably one of the better hitters in that lineup. You know, when you wanted the big RBI, you probably go to Alfonso over Piazza, but most people wouldn't. But that's the argument that is annoying to me. Don't tell me Pete Alonso needs protection, and then in the same breath, tell me that Pete Alonso is one of the best players in baseball. Because there were still people last year saying that this was Pete Alonso's team, that he was the best player on this team. But yet they complain, well, Pete Alonso never had a protection in the lineup. Yeah, because he shouldn't be having protection in the lineup because he was supposed to protect a guy like Lindor. Right? This was Pete Alonso's team until it wasn't. So, true, Neri, but again, when we look at OPSs, people look at it and be like, oh, you got to get Alonso. You got to keep Alonso there, right? OPS is a flawed stat when you want to look at it because you can use many stats involved in OPS and say that's why this OPS is better than this player. But yet this player might be a better player overall, but OPS tells you otherwise. It's a silly stat. I'm sorry, guys. If you can't tell based on average home runs, RBIs, I would even give you on-base percentage and slugging. If you can't tell if a player is good or not based on those stats, and now you got to give me OPS, WAR, OPS plus, then you're reaching for other stats to help your argument. If you can't tell based on the regular stats, the stats that we've been using for 100 years, and now all of a sudden give me OPS plus, with some pitches K per 9 and, all these other ERA plus and all these other crazy stats, then is this player actually as good as you're portraying him based on one stat? It's crazy to me. But again, if I had to choose between Bregman and Alonso, I would have to go Alonso. But for the argument that Bregman wouldn't help this Mets team is nuts. You guys are nuts. He is A+ defender. He will still give you 25 home runs. He'll still bat 265, 270. No problem. By the way, he has a career average 30 points higher than Pete Alonso, by the way. But again, if you only want to talk about this year, fine. Bregman will still help this team, right? I know people will be butthurt because it won't be Pete Alonso if it is Bregman, but Bregman will still help this team, right? Why does Bregman don't get the benefit of the doubt of not having protection, but Pete Alonso does. How ironic is that? Right? Chris brought up, put Soto behind Pete Alonso. Might make Pete Alonso better. Might give him more pitches. You can say the same thing for Bregman. So with that said, guys, I want to thank you for tuning in. Episode 16 of Mets Hot Stove Live. Let's hope it picks up a little bit prior, right? We only got, less than 10 days before Christmas, before Hanukkah, all these holidays coming up. Let's hope there's a couple of moves before the holidays start, because during the holidays, nothing's going to happen. From the week of Christmas or the week of the holidays all the way past New Year, nothing's probably going to happen because everybody's home, everybody's with their families. Nothing's going to happen. So if nothing happens prior to the week of Christmas or the week of the holidays, whatever you celebrate, then nothing's going to happen during that time, most likely. So with that said, guys, thank you for tuning in. Chris did have to jump out, has to start traveling. So make sure you subscribe to the channels. Hit that like button, guys. If anything breaks, I will come live, most likely, as long as I'm not at work. That might be hard to do, but hey, you never know. Yeah, hey, committee, Kwanzaa, right? Hanukkah, Christmas, whatever you celebrate, doesn't matter to me, right? At a very, very early age, and this is something that nobody probably cares about, I knew about Kwanzaa probably when I was like 6 or 7 years old, because my teacher, elementary school teacher, I think it was 2nd and 3rd grade, was from Africa, and she celebrated Kwanzaa, and we did a play based on Kwanzaa songs. And it's crazy to think, but I knew about Kwanzaa at a very young age. So I always brought that up. Committee, thank you for bringing that up, because I know it's a 30 years ago, but it's an interesting factoid for you guys that know a little bit more about me. So my teacher for 2 years straight, and I'll never forget her name, and her name was Miss Silverman. She was Miss Somerville, I'm sorry. And she was African, and she celebrated Kwanzaa, and we did. So it was crazy, but again, that's a little factoid about me. I'm sorry about that, but when the holidays are coming, and committee just brought up Kwanzaa, yeah, I knew about that at a very young age because of that. So I'm going to do at least a couple more shows prior to Christmas. We're still about 8-9 days away for that, or the holidays. So there will be more shows. But again, if you happen to be traveling, damn, committee, we're reading the same class. That would be hilarious. So if you can't come back to a stream because you're with family, you're moving, traveling for holidays, or going to spend a lot of time with your family and don't have time to come back to the stream, I want to say happy holidays to everybody. Safe traveling. Safe travels and all that stuff. Be safe, guys. As always, Met fans, let's go Mets. Enjoy the holidays, guys. If you don't come back to the stream over the next week or so, be safe. Enjoy it with your families, guys, and we'll see you next time on another Mets Hot Stove show. Hopefully, the Mets start making moves in the pitching department and possibly finalization of either Pete Alonso or Alex Bregman. Have a good night, guys. Let's go Mets, and I'll see you next time. Have a good night.
Dead of night, full of echo. Concrete jungle, trees bust to grow. Mets in the air, chase glory, no fear. Broken backs, but hearts steer clear.